you said something interesting. You said your husband liked women. What does that mean? Are there men who don't like women who marry women?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are men who like sex enormously,
Okay.
but I don't think men generally have much respect for women. That's a massive generalization. I wouldn't like to put a percentage on it, but I think that there are too many men, even one is too many, who look down on women as inferior beings.
Where does that attitude come from? From their own homes?
No, I think it's cultural. And I think it's my own view is that, having done research on it, I think it is deeply embedded in our culture, and it comes down from a very, very, very several thousand years ago.
Right.
My own view, having looked at it, because I couldn't understand why I was so denigrated, why I felt why I was made to feel inadequate, why I couldn't do this and couldn't do that, why I wasn't allowed to stay at school, because I was told by my stepmother, well, you're 16 now, you're a woman, you'll get married, education's a waste of time.
There's so many people who now find themselves we're still having these types of discussions, because again, women are in a place where they're thinking, wait, I have spent 4 years doing a university degree and I'm being told I have to choose between not having children and having a career, or just focusing on my career. And
well, I think you have to think very carefully about it.
Hi, Erica. Welcome to Ideology Podcast.
Hello, Sophia. Good to see you.
So I have been wanting to get you on Ideology Podcast for since I met you, which was last year, during the proclamation of the new king. You were marching in the procession, if that's the right word, and I had a really brief interview with you, which I can't believe it's been a year since the passing of the Queen. There were a few things that you said that I just thought, oh, I really love the energy of this lady and I would love to connect with her more. And so I'm glad that we're finally doing this.
Well, it's good, isn't it? Yes. I mean, it was a day I felt I couldn't possibly not go to, and there hadn't been a proclamation for 70 odd years. It was quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I couldn't believe I was witnessing it myself. I think we just always took for granted that the Queen would always be the Queen.
Yes, I mean, I was really hoping that she was going to beat the Sun King in terms of longevity, but of course he started earlier. Of course, he was a baby when he took the crown.
So let's start with this episode is really mainly about the legacy of Queen Elizabeth, and really trying to have a discussion about what her reign meant for someone like yourself, for someone like myself who grew up in a Commonwealth country and now calls the UK home, and really trying to look at also what it meant to have a female monarch who was a wife, a mother, and head of state for so many different countries. To start off, can you tell us a little bit about how old you were when Queen Elizabeth was crowned?
I was 10.
You were...
And we'd been given special leave from school to watch the coronation. And we had a television, amazing. And it was a tiny little, by today's standards, I mean, it was huge by those standards, but by today's standards, it was very small. It was a 9-inch screen in black and white.
A black and white television.
And we all thought it was wonderful.
Oh, wow. And so obviously you have a lot to compare it to, but you could see the coronation?
Yes, yes. I mean, it was done in a the way that people in authority were treated then was, if you like, much more reverential and deferential than it is today. Today they're treated almost, but not quite, as equals. Then they certainly weren't. And so I recall the cameras in Westminster Abbey were, if you like, differently set. They weren't what you might call intrusive style cameras.
Mm.
And they would have been very careful over how they photographed people who were attending.
So there was privacy for the people who were attending, other heads of state, perhaps?
I would have thought so. I mean, I don't remember well enough. I mean, for heaven's sake, I was only 10.
Yeah.
I can remember bits. So, I can remember the Queen processing into the Abbey with her ladies in waiting, and she looked glorious. I can remember after she'd been crowned and she was accepting homage, and all these several dukes and other senior ranking males came up to express homage, such as her husband. It was really quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Do you watch The Crown?
No, I don't watch television.
Oh, okay. And I just wondered how true you think it is and what you're making of it. But so for us, I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and all I ever knew was the Queen as head of state and Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister. So I didn't even have any idea about a difference in gender or even question that a woman could be a leader. Can we talk a little bit about the differences? What was it like for you seeing
Well,
her?
can I just go back to Margaret Thatcher, because that was something I'd not thought of. But I remember being astonished to learn that because Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, that boys at school didn't think being Prime Minister was a worthwhile job to have, because it was a woman's job. Because that's all they'd seen. But as a little girl, I was totally thrilled, because my background was that I'd realized considerably earlier that girls were discriminated against, and I didn't see why that was the case. We were made to work in the house. It wasn't often we were allowed to go out to play, unlike the boys. When my stepmother was pregnant with what turned out to be my little brother, I understood, and I think she must have been joking with friends, but I understood that if it was another girl, we already had two, me and my elder sister, it would be drowned in the duck pond. What I didn't understand at 5 that was a joke.
But the fact that that joke was being made, I mean, what does that say? I mean, it's really, really hard to imagine that that was life just in our lifetimes.
But it was, because women had really no power. Okay, yes, they got the vote. And yes, they were now able, in most cases, to get degrees and things of that nature. But I think Cambridge didn't allow women who'd studied at the women's colleges in Cambridge, they weren't mixed in those days, to have degrees until about 1948 or 49.
Right. And so all this was very new. So even though, let's say, the Queen was crowned in 1953.
53, yes, on June the 2nd from memory.
Yeah, so it was just a new thing that, universities had started to become co-ed, and probably not, in great numbers, I'm assuming.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the Oxford and Cambridge colleges did not go co-ed until, gosh. Now, this is knowledge I don't really have, but I would have said late 60s, early 70s.
It's hard to think of that Britain today, but in some ways, so much of that is still present. Okay, so then now looking at the impact of this having had on you. You're 9, 10, and a woman comes into power, and then you're of age, and another woman is actually leading the United Kingdom, but you feel men's attitudes was not, oh, a woman can be anything. It literally just diminished the roles, is what you're saying?
Well, that was how I felt over, well, it was really the young lads at school that, this is where I picked it up, that they thought because it was, quotes, a woman's job, because the woman had it, that it
Yeah.
wasn't a job worthy of a boy.
And what did
And
they then aspire to?
I don't know, because, if you're just a kid at school, I guess if you're a boy, you aspire to do something that you see other men do.
Right, of course. Yeah. And
And if you
all the
see a
time,
woman, and she was in power for what, 10 years or so, she was an amazing woman. I didn't agree with everything she did, but I had a huge respect for her.
yeah, oh, she had to be. A lot of people criticize her for having those masculine attributes and, the ballsiness. But even the fact that we say ballsiness.
Well, there isn't another word for it, unfortunately. I don't think.
But I think a lot of younger women forget the transition that has to take place. If you're starting off in a society where girls aren't allowed to play, girls weren't allowed to have, the same equal opportunities for education and certain types of jobs, of course, you're not going to have natural feminine qualities um, respected in the workplace, and that is still something that is ongoing.
Well, it is still there, but I mean, and you can see that in the reports from the medical profession that we've seen in the press this week. But I mean, my experience as a patient of doctors, and my experience of what my stepmother, what I learned from my stepmother over her dealings with the medical profession, is that men have this tendency to talk down to you. I mean, recently, for example, or about 10 years ago, I slipped and I broke my pelvis. Whilst I was in hospital, I was being registered, as it were, by a young male registrar. And he looked at me rather witheringly and he said, no, and what do you do? I said, I'm retired. And boringly, he said, oh, what did you do before you retired? I said, judge. And he looked at me. He leapt up out of his chair and he rushed across to see his boss. And he came back a few minutes later and said, the consultant will see you now.
Wow.
I was absolutely incensed. And I told him so, and I told his boss so. I said, that is not the right way to treat people. If my condition is something which needs a consultant, then I should see him. If my condition is something that doesn't need a consultant, then I shouldn't see him. Doesn't matter what my job was.
Wow. We're still a very much status obsessed nation. And it's interesting talking to you and seeing how these also now intersect with gender, because a lot of times people dismiss that. I mean, I'm reading these reports about, surgeons who are operating and sexually abusing women and putting their faces in their chest. It's really hard to imagine that this is where we are, despite all the discussions we're having about gender. And what's interesting is, again, reflecting on the legacy, the Queen's legacy, we've had women in leadership positions at the highest levels of power. So if that's not going to shift and make men, treat women differently, what do you think is going on?
I think that there are collections of men who get, I don't know, some sort of amusement out of what you might call I used to call them rugby jokes,
Right.
but
Lockup and
you
top,
know,
they call them in America, I think.
I mean, they're pretty disgusting.
Mhm.
But they make men feel good in a male society, and they all laugh and giggle at them. And if I go back to my first full-time job after I qualified, I went to work for an institution which taught young people for their professional exams. I was the only girl on the staff. 3 of my colleagues did not want to see me there. They moved heaven and earth to get rid of me. In their different ways, they said I had no business turning up to the coffee and tea sessions that we had, because it meant that they couldn't talk freely. I discovered from the others that this meant they couldn't tell their filthy jokes, and the others were really pleased that the filthy jokes had stopped. Another thing they told me was that if there were more, my arrival meant that if a woman could do the job would be downgraded to a woman's job, and their salaries would go down. And I think the third thing I was told to do was to go home and start being a woman. That meant having babies, I think.
And so there was no way, even though we had the Queen having babies and meeting heads of states, there was no way that was actually filtering into.
No, it hadn't filtered into their little heads at all.
Right. So how did you manage then to have a high-powered career? I mean, judge is as high as you can get, and be a mother and a wife.
Well, I was lucky. I had a man as a husband who liked women.
Okay, interesting.
I mean, a lot of my girlfriends would say, well, you're so lucky your husband lets you go out to work, lets you go away and lecture. Because I used to go away and lecture on courses and things. And they say, yeah, my husband wouldn't let me do that. And I said, but we don't have that sort of relationship. If he has to do something, he tells me, I adjust around him. If I have to do something, I tell him, and he adjusts around me. We don't have an allow or permissive situation where I have to ask for permission or he has to ask for permission. We just liaised. And also, I mean, he ran what he called the law of the situation. So, for example, if you look at household chores, if he saw something needed doing, he did it.
Wow. So what is
and when towards the end of my working career and he was retired, and he did all the shopping, all the cooking, all the cleaning.
Yeah.
Because I was at work. He never asked about it. He never said, should I do it?
Right.
He never asked me, or effectively laid it on so that I would thank him profusely for it. He didn't do that. That was just how we worked. We had a wonderful relationship. We were very lucky.
I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had with women in the last few years who are younger and then look at, again, older women like myself who think, okay, there's just literally no way you can have a career and be a mother and make that work. There's something that's going to suffer. And all the conversations in the press, generally are about changing, having more women in leadership positions. And if we do that, then maybe it's going to filter down. But from talking to you, I am starting to understand that there's a lot more that's needed, because this country has had that example, if that was going to change culture. You said something interesting. You said your husband liked women. What does that mean? Are there men who don't like women who marry women?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are men who like sex enormously.
Okay.
But I don't think men generally have much respect for women. That's a massive generalization. I wouldn't like to put a percentage on it, but I think that there are too many men, even one is too many, who look down on women as inferior beings.
Where does that attitude come from? From their own homes?
No, I think it's cultural. And I think it's my own view is that, having done research on it, I think it is deeply embedded in our culture, and it comes down from a very, very, very several thousand years ago.
Mm-hmm. Right.
My own view, having looked at it, because I couldn't understand why I was so denigrated, why I felt why I was made to feel inadequate, why I couldn't do this and couldn't do that, why I wasn't allowed to stay at school, because I was told by my stepmother, well, you're 16 now, you're a woman, you'll get married, education's a waste of time.
Mm-hmm. There's so many people who now find themselves in we're still having these types of discussions, because again, women are in a place where they're thinking, wait, I have spent 4 years doing a university degree and I'm being told I have to choose between not having children and having a career, or just focusing on my career. And
Well, I think you have to think very carefully about it. The background in my case was, and I did think long and hard before children, and it was nothing to do with the job. It was actually to do with the fact that my mother died when I was 4.
right.
And so I spent my childhood desperately wanting my mother. I didn't know my father because he was away in the forces. He got a compassionate discharge in order to come home to take care of us. I have no idea whether he came home before mother died or after mother died, but I didn't know him.
So you have literally no memories of your mother?
I have memories of my mother, but it was just after my 4th birthday.
And then you had this relationship
Yes,
with your stepmother.
and I had a new parent. I mean, his photograph was on the mantelpiece. My elder sister told me years later that when father arrived home and I was told, this is daddy, I said, but it's not daddy, because he didn't look like the picture on the mantelpiece. Well, that was taken at the outset of the war when he'd just been called, but no, he volunteered. So this was 6, 8 years later.
And a lot of children will have lost their parents to the war.
Yeah.
What was that like? Can you
Very,
describe
very
that?
I mean, I come from a background where a huge number of my friends had no fathers, and I had no mother. All of us suffered hugely. And this was one of the reasons why I wanted to have a job. Now, because culture and society meant that women, certainly in my background, in my hometown, did not work. I wanted a job as an insurance policy because I could see that in our home we had a father, and of course all kids know that daddies have jobs, or most daddies have jobs. And so our home was infinitely more prosperous than my friends' homes. And I put it down to mothers not having a proper job and fathers having one. So I wanted what I called in my childhood head a proper job, so that if I were in the same situation, I could go out and earn the necessary money. I never thought I would be working. I wanted the right to work by having the qualifications.
A lot of men now are saying that that's what actually is at the root of why so many men are unemployed, is because women have been used to replace men. Do you think this is maybe another thing that creates conflict in the gender?
Well, when I looked in the late 60s and 70s, we began to have a society where it seemed that marriages were breaking up a lot more. People's I mean, the mechanisms of getting divorced had been ameliorated, and it was no longer quite such a cultural shock if people did get divorced. Now, from my looking on, I concluded that many men were quite happy to be married and have the servant in the household and the sex mate. But as soon as that broke up, they were not prepared to pay for the children they'd fathered. And that's why things like the Child Support Agency were set up, to try to force fathers to contribute towards their family. And it's not satisfactory. Now, my other thought on that was that if men were not going to support children in broken marriages, then the only way that mothers can realize that they can support their children is by having a proper job that they can go to.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly I recall in the late 60s, the trades union people, probably the TUC, I'm not sure, I remember it being said, was saying that women shouldn't be working because it took away a working man's job.
Right.
But, you know, there were many women around whose husbands had died or been killed in the war. How were they supposed to survive if they couldn't have a job? Look at the Afghani women who can't work and they have no men because their men have died. How do they manage? Do they starve to death?
Yeah, in my own country, women have to go to the market and try and sell what they can. A lot of times, you know, the education wasn't prioritized. So what skills do you have to sell to support your family if you don't have the male breadwinner? I just find a lot of times these conversations aren't happening in a consistent way so that we actually understand what's changed. A lot of young men are now having these same conversations, but really just finding ways to put it all on women and say, you know what, women are a lot more materialistic. Women are demanding women are demanding partners in high-powered jobs before they can even consider marriage, but failing to take into account that actually we still don't have a system in place, adequate childcare. You know, because that's another thing, you know, when you think about the Queen and you think about all these women who are figureheads, they have a real village supporting the children. So in your instance, it was because your husband and you actually worked together to be two actual parents. And that's
yes, we did. And the reason we did was because I said to him, if we're going to have children, then I don't want my children to be left if I should die early. I mean, my mother was 37 when she died. I had no expectations of living beyond the age of 37. Because apparently, that is apparently what I know, talking to my friends, they all think they're not, that if their parent has died, say at 60 or even at 70 or perhaps at 50, that's the target they might be lucky to reach. It doesn't occur to them that they might live, in my case, more than twice as long as their dead parent. And so I was very concerned. In the Southeast, men tend not to get home until after small children have gone to bed. At the weekends,
some places.
yeah, at the weekends, they go off and they play golf because naturally they've got to have a rest and go and see their male friends and relax with themselves. So they go off and do whatever male thing takes their fancy. And far too many of them do, and far too few of them spend any time with their little children. So if mother dies, the child does not know its father. And
Yeah.
I think it's bad enough to lose a parent when you're a child. It is totally devastating. I don't know anybody who's lost a parent in childhood who has recovered from it.
No.
You can blot it out, you can cope with it, but you're always affected by it.
Especially if that parent was the mother, right?
Well, I don't know. I can't comment. I didn't lose my father. I lost my mother.
Yeah, but we know what father can.
So what I said to him was, if we're going to have children, I'd like us both to be involved. I said, I'm prepared to work part-time from home. What can you do to help us both get involved? So we actually both worked part-time.
Wow.
It meant a huge fall in income. But the net result was, and I actually grew all our own vegetables because we're lucky enough to have a garden.
You grew all your own vegetables?
Yes.
Incredible.
Well, I mean, I had to do something because we didn't have any money, really. You know, we had to pay the general outgoings, like they were called rates in those days, the council tax and the electricity and things like that. So we had to cut down on everything else that we spent. So yes, I made all our own wine. We made all our own vegetables.
You have a perfect life.
So yes, so I've got
Got a return to the country house type of, lifestyle. It's what everybody's craving.
we were very lucky. We have a little house with a little garden, and it's, we have the facilities in order to do that.
Oh, how life has changed. I can't even.
So we were just, we weren't living in a flat. We were just incredibly lucky. But luck is tinged with also vision. And the net effect of what we did meant that our child, we ended up only having one, our child ended up with a really good relationship with both her father and her mother.
Yeah. Was that a deliberate choice to have one?
It came about, he wanted only one because he'd been an only child till he'd been about 12 or 13. And then number 2 turned up and he never felt quite happy about it.
He didn't bond with the sibling.
Well, I mean, he did look after her very well, but I think he had different problems emotionally in his childhood from mine. And so he didn't have a good relationship with his mother because his mother had ditched him on grandma when she had him.
To do what? To go work or?
No, because she wanted, she decided she clearly didn't like being pregnant. So she decided to divorce her husband and they got divorced in Prague. And I think he must have been Czech. And so husband was dumped on grandma. Grandma absolutely adored him. And I think that's why he loved women so much. And when mother and new man in her life came back from Europe in the late 30s because of the darkening clouds of Hitler's progress, he, the bloke, decided that that it wasn't right for the little boy to be with grandma.
Right.
So they took court action to collect boy back from grandma. And anyway, so this poor child who only knew his grandmother and adored her was taken away from her and didn't know either of his 2 parents.
Wow. And so,
You know, it's quite tough, but I once asked him if he loved his mother. He said, I respected my mother very much, he said,
mhm,
which I thought was damning with faint praise.
yeah. It sounds to me like, you know, I think that sometimes people say you have to have this type of example to create this type of family. Like, from what you say about your husband, it sounds to me like he decided for himself what kind of person he wanted to be and what kind of family he was going to have, despite the fact that he didn't have that in his own life.
I don't know. I can't comment. I mean, I was his second wife. His first wife was killed in a car crash. And he had bucked the system by marrying a woman who was 12 and a half years older than him, who'd been married before, had had children with her husband. And so he had sort of semi-grown-up children.
Okay. And then he met you,
And
and
then we met up sometime after she died.
yeah,
And you know, and we got married about 9 months later.
it sounds to me like you're lucky. I'm trying to figure out what are the lessons that we can draw from your successful marriage and successful work-life balance. But it's just, it sounds to me like that he came with those attributes.
He did. He did. I mean, all my girlfriends told me I was extremely lucky.
Yeah.
And you know, and that was their words, not mine.
Mhm.
Which means that far too many men out there were not as lovely as he.
Mhm.
And you know, he got on really well with his male friends, but he was equally wonderful with the girlfriends.
And none of that had anything to do with you being and him growing up in the Elizabethan age, you know, a changing culture, a shift
I
that,
don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I think that my determination purely arose from the way I was treated as a child and the fact that I was really shocked about the way my stepmother was treated by her doctors. And I mean, I remember when my little brother was born. Well, I've been told this story. I don't actually remember it myself, but apparently I asked the doctor why he was a boy and I was a girl. And the doctor's response was, because I said so. So I hit him, I am told. Because,
never want to be a boy.
well, boys could go and play with daddy, and I wanted to play with daddy. Boys could go and climb trees. Boys never had to do any work in the house.
Mm-hmm.
If they wanted to, they could, but they didn't have to.
Right.
We were
But
skivvies.
what are things about, you know, boy life that you felt, you know what, I would not want that?
I don't think I saw anything at that age. It wasn't that I particularly was very fond of little boys, because, you know, 5-year-old boys are not necessarily 5-year-old girls' best friends, are they?
No, no.
And
Very
I can recall I had a little girlfriend who at school who was the daughter of our dentist, and she and I determined aged about 7 we were going to marry each other when we grew up, because we were much nicer than the boys.
What do you think is going to be the difference now that we have a king, even though we do have a queen? We were referring to Camilla as queen consort, and she's a queen. But how do you think this new reign will differ?
I think if you come from a male orientated household,
Mm-hmm.
then what you will notice as a girl is that in the main, the people at the top of life are men. And that must have an impact on you.
Men and women have been at work together for decades now. why is it we're still getting this type of news headlines in really respectable professions like medicine? And why has that not changed? You say it's because men, there are certain types of men, but these numbers are quite high.
Well, look, they don't like a lot. There are still too many men who don't like seeing women who can do their job.
But they know no other life. These are men who've now
That's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. If they look down on women in the first place, they are. Yeah. When I was a kid, girls were supposed to be empty-headed, fluffy little heads. The idea that they might do something clever was no.
What do you think women today should do to give themselves the best chance of having a full life?
I think they've got to choose their male friends very carefully. It takes a long time to get to know a man. And a lot of men have an inferiority complex when it comes to women. And that's why they need to control them. They will control them by shouting at them. They control them by hitting them. They control them through sex. They control them by, I mean, I had one girlfriend who was really independent little sod like me, who found that her bloke changed after they'd been married about 9 months to become exceptionally controlling. And if he wanted to watch a particular program on the television, whatever she was doing, she was required to go and watch it with him. And she couldn't do anything else. So she couldn't, if she wanted to do knit, she couldn't, say, prepare the vegetables for a meal. She couldn't write a letter. She couldn't do a puzzle or whatever she might fancy doing. No, she had to sit and watch this boring program with him. And that's just an example of the control mechanisms that he imposed. Another one, I noticed, he was in the car trade and he kept changing her car.
What was that about?
I have no idea, but it was to show that he controlled. So she had no choice over what her car was, but she would regularly find that car number 1 had gone and car would be replaced by car number 2.
So,
and in the end, I mean, she said to me that she had got to the stage where she was actually shivering in the bedroom, wondering how to cope. And this very strong woman that I've known nearly all my life took herself off on a course to learn how to look after herself better.
An assertiveness course?
Yes.
Okay, wow.
And I've never known anybody be more assertive than her.
So she was able to be that in many other areas of her life, but when it came to her partner, because of the dynamics and the relationship.
Yes.
Wow. What would you say then? What are kind of signals? Because the thing is, when you're dating, people present a certain image. It's hard to know.
I think it's hard to know. And part of it, of course, is the hormones jump in. So I think it's very tricky, but I do think there are inevitably going to be little signs. For example, if I think of an example from my life, with one man I was involved with who got really cross because I chatted to his chums and not their wives. Well, his chums were talking about something I was interested in, and they were, and the girls weren't. So I talked to them, and I was told off because I was not allowed to talk to the other men.
But do you think this is because the men tend to sexualize every relationship, every interaction?
I don't know. I really don't understand it, but I do know that far too many men, it starts with very tiny steps.
Yeah.
And women do not look out for them to protect themselves because they see this chap and the hormones get running and he's lovely to be with, and they miss the bits which are the incipient control.
So what did you personally do when you started to see, okay, we're dating and these are the kind of things you're presenting? Did you then end the relationship and think, I'm going to wait?
No, I tended to sort of, when I was a kid, I refused to go out with just one person because I didn't want to find that I was typecast as being, oh, that's his girlfriend.
Right.
And I
You
wanted,
dated and got to know lots of different people.
yes.
Okay.
And also my main concern was to qualify.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't interested in looking at boys for a partner purpose until I'd got my qualifications.
And in these qualifications,
Because I knew that if I were to get too involved, then I wouldn't be allowed to finish my training.
If you went with a partner.
Yes, because virtually every boyfriend I had would ring me up midweek, and I was always doing a correspondence course after work midweek because it was the only, I mean, that was my college in my bedroom. Mm-hmm. And they would say, when I refused to go out tomorrow, they would say, I don't know why you're doing this, because when I marry you, I won't let you go out to work. And I just laugh.
But how common was that? If it's common, then what made you think, not only, okay, yes, I'm driven to do this and I know what my needs are and I'm looking for this type of security because I didn't have that as a child? Because obviously that's not conscious, is it? What made you think?
I don't know. I think in my case it was conscious. I had taken a very deliberate decision. Okay. And I bucked the system.
And then at what point did you meet your great husband who became a supporter?
I met him when I was, I met him on the 1st of November, 1970.
Yeah. And how old were you both?
I was, hang on, I have to do the sums.
Your 20s or 30s?
I must have been 27.
Yeah.
And he would have been 39.
Okay, so he was a bit more mature. You had, like you say, he was divorced. So
no, he wasn't. He was widowed.
He was, oh yes, he was widowed. Yes. And so that will have really matured him. Whereas probably if you met someone your own age who hasn't lived a bit, maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. I mean, friends who've married later in life have met the similar problems that I've been describing. So it's not an age thing. I don't think it's an age thing. Yeah. It's a personality thing. Are you happy inside your own skin? How do we have that conversation with more men and more women? I don't know. I don't. What are you finding now? Men your age, are they more mature? Men my age are, well, I suppose an awful lot of them are dead. So, I mean, there are problems when you're getting as old as I am, because I'm now in my 80s, that you have to watch out for whether the current man in your life is actually looking for a nursemaid. And that sort of thing. You just don't know. I mean, which is pretty much what they were looking for when they were younger.
we're a different sort of nursemaid.
Yeah, it sounds like the same type of man you described who was looking for a servant and somebody to just simply have sexual relations with and looks after his house and is not really looking for a full human being. It sounds like they just matured and now are looking for someone to look after them.
I just don't know.
It just sounds like you
I
were lucky.
retain a deeply independent life.
Yeah. It just sounds like you were lucky to find the person that you found and that they
I,
are
I, I
rare.
think I was very lucky.
Yeah. I should tell all women, look, from what it sounds like, they are still quite rare.
I think they are quite rare from what my girlfriend, another of my girlfriends married an absolutely lovely man who just adored her.
Yeah.
And when I used to go and stay with them. I was godmother to one of their children. And he and I would have long chats in the kitchen whilst he washed up yet more things and I dried up yet more things. And Mama was out playing tennis or golf.
Oh, wow.
And whenever I phoned in the evening, he'd always say, "Oh, she's not in." We would have a long chat, and I'll get her to phone you. He'd say.
But what do you think then, that kind of man, again, would you describe it as he just was in love with his wife and he wanted her to be happy and fit?
Yes, he was. He went along with whatever she wanted. It
Because,
was an amazing. That was another really amazing relationship.
yeah, but you're not describing too many of those for in your social circle
No,
and not even in your working life. Not your colleagues had, strong supportive marriages.
I couldn't. Well, I don't know. It's not the sort of thing you ask, is it?
Well, were there a lot of female judges in your circle?
No, no, no. It was. I mean, we formed a little. There was a little group of us. We used to meet up. Um, there was a group of about 6 of us who decided that we really ought to have some female relationships at work, and there weren't any. So we were all in separate courts. So we used to meet up for dinner. In fact, we're busy organizing another dinner or lunch later this month.
How helpful was that for your careers and for your personal?
Well, we used to have a good old laugh about it.
Right. And exchange experiences, and you would find,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, yes. And it was just good to have another woman to talk to.
yeah,
I mean, your male colleagues were super, but you don't want necessarily to be chatting to the other sex all the time.
yeah. There's certain things you can't really talk to another man about. Let's quickly talk about a little bit about the new queen and what you think about Kate Middleton too. Why do you think we haven't warmed to Camilla so much?
Well, I don't understand why we haven't warmed to Camilla so much because I think she's smashing.
You do?
And yes, and
Okay.
you know, I, look, people have bad marriages. I know Diana won everybody's hearts, but for God's sake, it's a long time ago. And in any event, most of us, many of us, will have broken marriages. Things don't work out for whatever reason.
Mm.
It's often reasons completely external to the marriage. But it may be problems within the marriage. You just don't know.
Mhm.
And why can't people forgive Charles?
Mhm.
Allow Diana the rest that she deserves. I mean, she was a lovely young woman, but for heaven's sake,
Mhm.
we've got a fabulous queen.
Mhm.
She is just so super. I
Mhm.
don't understand the antipathy that some people are issuing, are saying about her. I mean, she's very, very supportive. She adores our king. I mean, what more can we want?
Have you met her?
I've had the opportunity to meet her once. I consider I was extremely lucky. Um, and and I thought she was just utterly charming.
Wow. You don't really get that ever from the press.
Well, the press isn't interested in telling nice stories.
Yeah. And do you think, again, when you say that, as somebody who lost a parent, do you think we're really harming these two princes even more? We didn't let them grieve properly and heal from their mother's death, and now we're pitting them constantly against each other.
Well, I feel, I have huge pity for Harry, because let's face it, it was a no-win situation. If he'd been prevented from walking behind his mother's funeral cart, he would have resented it.
Yeah.
And he resents being allowed to walk behind a cart because it's bloody tough to lose your parent. And they were very close. It wasn't just a dad that they'd never seen, who maybe popped in occasionally and had a meal with them.
Yeah.
This was a woman with whom they had a very close relationship. And she was a devoted mother.
I think that's why the nation really struggles to decouple.
Well, you can't, you have to allow people their lives. You can't, just because our king and his first wife got divorced, there's no reason to castigate him and his second wife for here on out. It's ludicrous. You have to move on.
Why do you think they didn't have, because they were clearly in love right from the beginning? So again, is it because Britain was in a different place culturally that he wasn't?
Who do you mean love from the beginning?
Camilla and Charles.
The gossip says, and of course I have no knowledge. I can only read what I read in the papers, like you.
You didn't ask her when you last met her?
No. It's not the sort of thing you ask, is it? Don't be silly.
Can you
take
this out for me?
You couldn't possibly. She's not a chum. I've just met her once. I think I was very lucky to have met her and seen what a lovely, happy woman she is.
It's so nice to hear you actually talk about her so warmly. I'll look at her differently now.
She is, for heaven's sake, frankly, who'd want to be a queen? Have your life dissected every second? If you're wearing the wrong clothes, or you put your foot slightly in front of your husband, who is the boss, someone's going to notice it, and you're going to be castigated for it. You can't do anything you do that might be possibly construed as being wrong, will be construed as being wrong.
The worst thing for me is having the entire world read their private texts, because I remember that as a young girl. I remember reading it in the papers. And even now, when I think of what was disclosed and how private those messages were,
it was disgusting. It should never ever have been printed.
Yeah,
it's really intrusive. It's the sort of thing that just should not happen. I never read them.
Why do you think our queen was not strong enough to really put boundaries with the press and say this is...
I don't think you can put boundaries with the press. The press will do their own thing. I think there are aspects of the press which believe that the only thing that sells their papers, and that's all they're interested in, is sex, murder, and abuse. But I'm constantly amazed. I don't read the articles in newspapers which talk about, well, I bedded 3 women a day, or every day, and they were fighting to come to my bed. It doesn't interest me. I wasn't interested in looking at the page 3 girls. I used to wonder why the hell they did it, but presume they got well paid.
Mhm.
You know, it's
It is the pain. Page
it,
3
it,
has
it,
gone
it, it,
global now.
it's not my scene, to be honest, and it never has been. And how on earth any woman can ever admit to having sex with more than one person is beyond my comprehension.
I think it's conditioning. I mean, children are sexualized so early,
Far too early.
far too early. I look back at the images
Their
that were,
childhoods have been taken away from them.
yeah. I remember thinking, why is every interaction with a man always have these sexual undertones to people? Because the first thing people will ask you is, oh, what do you think of him? And it's always, has these undertones that I never understood, but it's like our society can't see anything but through the filter of sex. And women pay a huge cost for that.
Yes, they do. But they don't understand it. And I mean, I, I'm really pleased for my childhood that things like the pill did not come online until I was sufficiently grown up to be able to deal with it.
Hmm. Yeah, imagine being told at 12 already, this is how you can prevent a pregnancy. And
I mean, my view is you prevent a pregnancy by saying no.
yeah. But it's the thing.
And you say no. I mean, the first thing you need to do is to be, in my view, old enough as a girl to take on the responsibility of an unwanted pregnancy.
Yeah. How did that used to be so commonplace even in my generation. How have we come so far that that is now considered a minority outlook?
It's interesting. When I was a young woman, it was, so far as I was aware, it was very rare for, well, certainly in my middle class society, for the boys to pursue their girlfriends beyond what you might term heavy petting,
Mm-hmm.
um, because they all wanted to marry virgins.
Yeah,
The occasional ones would make a mistake.
right.
Um, I
So both
I remember during my training being involved with a paternity case. Now, this is where the girl concerned had a baby and she was pursuing the father for maintenance, which I remember in those days, it was been about 1961, 62-ish, was set at about £2.50 a week. Now, this case went on for some time in our local courts. And essentially, he had brought along as many friends as he could find who were prepared to swear in the witness box that they'd had sex with this girl as well, in order, because see, in those days, you couldn't prove paternity.
Oh,
There was no mechanism of taking swabs and testing them. And
so this discredited her
so
completely.
they wanted to discredit her. I don't actually remember the outlook, but I remember feeling desperately sorry for her. I mean, I had another case where a girl I knew managed to get herself pregnant, and he refused to stand by her. And she went off with the help of other friends. I only found out about it after all this event, after everything had happened, because she became very ill afterwards. But she went off and got a backstreet abortion. Because there weren't abortion facilities. I'm a strong supporter of abortion.
Especially given how much rape still occurs in our society.
Well, I think rape occurs for a number of reasons. And there is a theory, but I have not seen any research on it, that if a girl is raped, she is more likely to conceive than if she has sex in a normal, happy situation.
Why?
I suspect if it's true, it's because the fear created by the rape produces the right sort of hormones. And that this could be, without the men having thought about it, it could be an instinct whereby he rapes and he doesn't realize that the net, he doesn't personally in his head realize it, but the net impact of the rape will mean his genes will continue.
And it's not something he consciously would want. I
imagine. No. He's not interested in the outcome. He's only interested in having the sex and enjoying roughing up the girl.
That's the thing I really struggle to understand. I mean, you say you don't watch television, but if you go now on any streaming channel, let's say Netflix, so much of the content is violence against women, rape. It's insane.
But of course it is. That is what people want to watch. Now, one of the reasons I would not have a television in our house when our child was small was because I didn't want external influences inside our home, influences that I couldn't control.
Right.
Now, if drama that you get on television is streamed into your home, your kid is bound to see, your children are bound to see what happens. And the boys will see that girls get beaten up and are raped. And the girls will see that they are beaten up and are raped. Now, what impact does that do to both your sons and your daughters? It's appalling.
It is. The quantity.
They take it in subliminally.
Yeah.
And the boys believe that this is okay for them to do. And the girls don't want it to happen, but they don't see any choice.
Why is it we haven't legally been able to put some form of restrictions to protect young minds? And it just seems to be the boundaries are.
There's a lack of will.
There's a lack of will. Why? Because we can clearly put boundaries for the young.
Well, I think the answer is they feel they probably can't put sufficient boundaries in and actually monitor it.
Including pornography. It's violent pornography out there now.
Yeah, well, I remember the only pornography case I actually remember was Lady Chatterley's Lover. Penguins, I think it was, brought out the full script of D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. And I had a friend who managed to get one of the original copies, so I read it. And it gripped the nation for the whole of the trial as to whether this book was pornographic and should be destroyed or whether it was not. And I read the book because I wanted to know what the problem was. And because of my complete ignorance, I didn't know what it was that was pornographic in it.
How old are you?
Late teens, 18. Now, apparently, the offending word was the one that begins with F and ends in K.
Oh, wow.
And I had learned this word. I spent some time at a boarding school, which was wonderful because I got away from my stepmother. But I remember I used to share a bath night with a girl who was a bit more sexually advanced than I was. And she asked me one day if I knew what this word meant. And I said, no. Oh, I said, and she said, oh, it's when the man lies on top of a woman and jumps up and down. And we all agreed it sounded really disgusting.
Oh, how
So,
quaint.
that was my experience of the word. I didn't know it was a pornographic word. It wasn't a word I wanted to use anyway.
How do we go from that in one lifetime
I
to
don't know.
12-year-old? Literally, I get descriptions of what's happening in assembly right now.
It's not. It's terrible.
It's terrible, but
I can tell you another funny story about that. One of my girlfriends was on holiday in the south of France with her mum and dad. And she was doing something that she got too near a young couple who were doing what probably they shouldn't have been doing on the beach. And they told her to so and so off. So, and they were quite cross with her. And she eventually left them alone and went back to her. And she asked her parents what this word meant. And apparently, mother blushed to her as far as she possibly could. And father looked shocked. And they both told her she must never, ever, ever say it. So having got back home, she was desperate to tell her girlfriend about this experience. And so she painted it on the garage wall just after, so that her little friend knew what the word was. But she wasn't allowed to say it, you see. And shortly after it had been painted, and before the parents had discovered that this naughty word was now on their garage doors, Grandma came round and saw it, and all hell let loose.
why didn't she just write it in pencil or something?
Well, I don't think she thought that.
Oh, it just shows you the innocence of an entire generation just not so long ago.
Yes.
And how
I mean, we were allowed to be children. On the other hand, I mean, it was frustrating sometimes to be children. And, and our childhood lasted until we were 21.
That's incredible.
That didn't change until the 1969. There was a whole series of enactments in the late 60s, which were effectively sponsored by a Welsh MP called Leo Absey, who was fantastic. And he was the one who brought in changed the rules on divorce to make them considerably easier, and moved them from the expensive High Court into the less expensive County Court. And you could get your divorce on paper.
And what was the reasoning? What was the reasoning for making divorce more accessible?
It wasn't for making it more acceptable, it was for making it more easy. Because many people were stuck in limping marriages.
Right, that were harming the children, right?
Well, they were harming the children, but B, also, wife A perhaps refused to let husband A divorce her, but he went off to live with pseudo wife B in any event. And pseudo wife B wanted to get married. He wanted to marry her, and but they weren't allowed to.
Yeah, so now you have illegitimate.
Because the original wife had committed no offense in matrimonial terms.
Right. So if she doesn't want to let him go, but he wants to go, did he also bring in child maintenance or?
Well, it caused a lot of problems. I mean, there were many people in what you might call limping marriages, where it was just untenable. I mean, for example, if your wife left you, you suspected she'd been lured away by another man. Once you found out, you could sue that other man for damages for seduction.
Oh, how interesting.
Yes.
And so he would have to compensate you financially.
Yes. For removing for stealing the right to have sex with the wife.
And how would that end? Then he gets the money, but he also has to grant her the divorce so they can marry.
I don't know that necessarily happened.
Okay. How do
There
you?
was another rule which Leo Abste got rid of,
Yeah.
was the right to bring an action for, now what the hell was it called? Well, I can't remember, there's a technical term for it, I can't remember the word, but it was a right to force your errant spouse to come back home. That's it, it was called restitution of conjugal rights.
Right. And a lot of people exercise that? Or would you not want him if he left anyway?
Well, it was there. It was on the statute books. It was theoretically possible to do that. It was a product, I think, of the divorce rules that started to come in statutorily in the mid-Victorian times.
We need to bring that back for women. What do you think in terms of human rights, women's rights, just in your time as a judge to present? Do you feel like we're regressing, or are we really progressing?
I've always held the view that if push comes to shove, then women will be back in what the Germans call Kinderkirche Küche, children, church, and a kitchen.
That's what we'll go to in the future, or where
If
it's
push
starting
comes to shove, yes. And that's what's happened in Afghanistan on a grand term.
And you see that happening here in Western countries too?
I could see it happening. I feel that I've been remarkably lucky to be around when I have.
Right. Well, people are saying, observing the opposite trend, which is that actually depopulation is something that we should now be concerned about, and that millennials and Gen Z are not looking, majority or like a significant proportion now, are not even looking to get married and have stopped looking for partners, don't want children. So how do you see that change happening? Because it seems the other far extreme.
Well, of course, that's a different issue, isn't it? What I'm saying is that when the chips are down, then where men can, they will push women back into the home.
In some sense, don't you think that
We don't have the chips down at the moment, but it would never ever surprise me to see it.
Well, if we're in a situation,
and if women are not prepared, are not going to provide men with the children they think they want, although then they often don't support,
yeah,
it's conceivable there will be more rape.
it's happening. I mean, you see so much. I don't think I've seen this many headlines showing how like bold rape in the public parks. I mean, especially America. The more you see that, what do you think is happening? Is it because
the Americans have essentially their background culture is puritanical.
Okay.
And so whilst on the one hand, women are put into a certain pigeonhole, on the other hand, men like to prove to themselves that women are Jezebels. I mean, it's always the woman's fault. The lovely book called The Scarlet Letter, written by an American about 150 years ago. And it's all about that sort of community where our heroine or anti-heroine has been found guilty of committing adultery. And we know she committed adultery because she's not married, but she produces a child. And so she is required in her patriarchal village community to wear a frock and her clothes have to have an A for adulterous stitched onto them. She flaunts this by making a huge A and having it over her bosom, sort of from neck down to waist. And it's all about the interrelationships and how eventually we find out who the bigot was, who actually seduced her,
Mm-hmm.
who inevitably is a local pillar of society. But it's how life is.
Mm.
Men want to have it always, and girls want to have it always. And it, we all want to do everything,
Mm.
and we
What
can't have it.
what were some conversations that you had when you were judged to try and remedy these types of societal?
Well, we didn't really, because I basically didn't do much family work. I did do some of what we call public law, but this is the sort of what you might call battered baby syndromes, where children are taken away from the adults that are looking after them.
Mm-hmm.
I found it too emotionally distressing and effectively struggled to avoid doing them.
Mm. Yeah. And what impact does that have on you as a judge? Yeah, I mean,
Well, it brought back my childhood. That was the problem.
right. And so did you eventually feel like it compromised your work and you didn't want to do any more of that type of work?
I did my best. If I was offered it, I said I'd rather not, because I know I'd been put into it because they knew I had the experience of a battered home.
Mm-hmm.
But it was uh, it was the only thing that I had found really hard to do. It was too hard emotionally.
What were some other types of cases that stayed with you over the years?
I think I didn't do much of what I might call family work, but one of the things that I found was a recurrent theme was that if the father wanted access to the child after the relationship had broken,
Mm-hmm.
the mother's classic story was that he had sexually abused one or more of the children.
Mm.
And I can't believe, I've always found it difficult to believe that there can be that many men
Mm-hmm.
who sexually abuse their children.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know of men who did,
Mm-hmm.
because their children,
Why do you think women would say that? Because is it?
because it's difficult to prove, but it casts the aspersion and it allows them to carry on life happily without the child's father getting in the way.
But why would you not want support of the father in your life? I mean, it's
Um,
really hard being a single parent, though.
well, it's very difficult, isn't it? You find it's hard being a single parent, but on the other hand, you're going to worry that the child maybe likes his dad better than he likes you.
Yeah, only if you're not very good. Only if you're not going to put.
I don't know. I find it very. I've never been in that personal situation.
Hmm.
I find it
I
very.
can definitely sympathize with that, but it's something that I came to see. Actually, you should just focus on being the better parent that you can, the best parent you can be to them, and then the spiritual growth there is to actually think, okay, my child gets more love, and we could all do with more love.
Yes, but I mean, I don't understand why just because you don't want to live with the bloke, you have to poison the child's mind
Yeah,
against its other parent.
yeah,
It's not fair on the child,
no,
because it makes the child feel that part of it is ruined, because the part that comes from the castigated parent, it has damaged it.
hmm.
And that I think that's child cruelty myself.
Yeah. But is it because, do you think many people, by the time they're getting divorced, they actually hate each other?
That's irrelevant. You can hate each other as much as you like, but you have to make it clear to your children that their father is wonderful or their mother is wonderful,
Hmm.
but you just can't live together.
Hmm. Well, I have a mental
And the children will understand because they'll have seen you rowing.
what do you think is happening? There's a lot of abuse seems to be getting worse. And I mean, I don't know if that's the sense you get. I get that maybe because I read too much Daily Mail and too much of the Guardian and too much of all the newspapers. But it does feel like there's such a massive family breakdown that every day it's a battered child, but a lot of times by mothers are harming their children. It's just unfathomable to me.
Well, just because you're a mother doesn't mean you're going to be a good one.
Yeah,
It's not inbuilt.
it's not inbuilt, even if you had the baby.
Yes.
Oof.
Not all women not every mother makes a good mother.
I mean, I can relate to
Inevitably,
your
there are going to be
stepmother,
mothers. There are inevitably going to be mothers who
but the
resent the
numbers are
child.
so high.
Sorry?
The numbers seem to be really high. Every other day, there's a headline about a mother who's battered her baby.
Oh, how many children we've got? How many, we've got millions of people. We've got billions. We've got 9 billion plus people in this world. Inevitably, there is going to be a tiny minority that bash up their brats.
Yes, but for the majority, instinct.
For the majority, this doesn't happen. But
Yeah,
there will always be some.
yeah. And the system doesn't seem able to cope with that, to be honest.
Look, you have to pour money into it. If
Yeah.
you are dealing, as some of the inner London boroughs have to deal with, vast quantities of inadequate parents, you don't have the staff to cover.
All of these families.
And grown-ups can be remarkably good at dissimulating. And so you don't get the story. Or there are reasons why you can't get in, which you have to accept. If you want to go in and inspect the inside of the house to see what's happening to little Charlie or little Mary or whoever it is.
Incredible, yeah. It's just one of the
It is a really difficult task. I don't know how these people charged with the jobs actually cope with it, because it must be deeply emotional and very hard work.
yeah. Let's wrap up by talking about your book.
Ah,
So your book is called Women Aren't Persons.
yes. And
And
the reason I called it that was because really it goes to what we've been talking about today. It goes to how women have been perceived. Now, in England and Wales, I can't talk about Scotland, the law up there is different. But in England and Wales, we had ever since William the Conqueror, women were subjected to the laws which the Normans brought in. And the Normans, in their turn, were influenced, I presume, by the fact that they came from, in more recent generations, because they were originally Scandinavian, that they came from an area which had been under Roman rule, as much of Western Europe had been, not Germany, but England, France, Belgium, Italy, vast sway, going around into Asia Minor, and into Egypt and along the top of Africa. The Romans had an enormous empire, which began to implode in the um, around about 400 AD, but the impact of their laws remained. And the impact of one of their laws for women was that they had no rights. So whilst I understand the Anglo-Saxons, who had never been subject to Roman law, because they hadn't been conquered by the Romans, did not treat women in the same way. And you can see the impact of what you might call the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons and the Norse, in, say, places like Iceland and Scandinavia, where women have a much better relationship culturally and have had for many, many generations. But not necessarily equal rights with men, but I'm just saying that they had a better, more rights than the rights of English women.
Right.
And the Normans effectively ensured that women did not inherit property. It always went to the men if you were good enough to be, lucky enough actually to have some property as opposed to being a peasant. That that women could hold no public office, they couldn't vote, they had to do what they were told. And now we get to the stage where, as a result of early women writers, more women begin to read things, and this opens their eyes to their situation. Now, a lot of them were very prepared to put up with it, but some of them weren't. And some of them managed to get to universities where they probably weren't given a degree, but they got to universities. Now, and Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, for example, managed to qualify as a doctor. And she did it. She couldn't have done it via going to any of the medical schools because they were male only, but she managed to do it via the apothecary route. And as soon as they discovered that a woman had managed to qualify as a doctor, they changed the rules to stop women from doing it. And she then campaigned for years to get that rule changed, and it indeed was. But other women wanted to do things like be a lawyer. So there was a case brought by 4 really well qualified women in the early part of the 20th century, before the First World War, where they were seeking to be allowed to become solicitors under the Solicitors Act of, I think it was 1840 something or the other. Because in there, the words describing who could be a solicitor used the word person. And they said, we are persons. And so it went up before the courts, and it was very well argued. But on technical grounds, the Court of Appeals said that the women were not persons within the meaning of the Act. There'd been an earlier case where a woman had sought to become a student at one of the Inns of Courts, and she had taken that inner court to a tribunal and had again been dismissed on similar grounds. In her case, the fact that there was no evidence to show that any women had ever been a barrister, and therefore, again, they weren't a person for this purpose. And there was a similar case, I gather, at somewhere like St Andrews University in Scotland, where somebody again lost out as a result of being female. So that's why I call the book Women Aren't Persons. because until the end of the First World War,
Mhm.
no women had the vote, despite the fact that women with incomes had to pay tax. So it was taxation without representation. And a lot of women had formed they fought the tax measures a lot longer than they fought the voting measures.
Mhm.
And in fact, it wasn't until 1990 that married women were allowed to, or not allowed, but that rules were changed so that they no longer made their tax return as part of their husband's tax return. Their income was dealt with separately. I mean, this had been argued over for years.
Mhm.
And I recall going to a meeting to discuss a government green paper in the 70s on taxation of husband and wife. I was the only girl there and the only person under 40. And the boys said as one, "Oh, my wife wouldn't like this." And I then sat there and said, "Well, okay, statistics say that you will die before your wife.
Mhm.
How is she going to cope if you don't love her enough now to teach her how to take on these responsibilities?" And I told them the story about an aunt of mine whom I'd had to rescue after her husband died because she didn't even know how to write a check.
Wow. It's so incredible just to think that
And it's
this country was so much like what we today talk about in Afghanistan, and
yeah,
in just such a space.
it wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that good either. I mean, women, if they went out, had to wear a hat, and a lot of them wore a pretend veil made of mesh, material mesh, so that you could barely see it, but nonetheless it was there because you wear a hat to show you're inferior.
Wow.
That's why the Jewish men
Is it because
wear their little hats when they go to the synagogue because they are inferior to Jehovah.
Inferior to Jehovah and God?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or whatever they call. I mean, they don't have, God is too important. Well, no, as I understand it, no ultra-Orthodox Jew will ever say the name of God because it's not permitted.
Okay. Yeah.
But anyway, to come back to it, by the time we got to the end of the war, where women had done amazing things such as did you know they'd built Waterloo Bridge?
The women had?
Yes.
No.
Well, they did all sorts of things, and that was one of them.
I can't imagine. Women were doing construction?
Yes. Well, where were the men to do it?
Where were they? Because they all went to the war, right?
Yes, so the women were doing it.
Wow. This is the thing about war. It just changes everything so that you actually can't even have the gender differences that you would like to. What laws do you think still exist today that are just preposterous, that really hold women back?
I don't actually know of any now.
Yeah.
And there was a rule which effectively allowed a married man to do what he liked to his wife, providing he didn't kill her. Now, that essentially has been removed by the domestic violence statutes. But I don't think many men have actually heard of it or are prepared to abide by it.
There are a lot of men online now who think that society has gone too far in making the world female-centric.
It's not female-centric, it's male-centric, and women are still struggling.
Well, in the country,
can I just come back to where we were? The women in England and Wales did not begin to get rights until 1918 and 1919. And in 1919, that the Sex Disqualification Act was the one which allowed women to begin to join the professions and to start to be treated as equals. It didn't mean that they were, but it allowed them to go and do it.
What was it? So the pushback that you mentioned describing your career, that would have been the experience of most women going into work for the first time.
I'd have thought so.
Yeah. But again, how did they compute having, I can understand in 1919, but even then they'd had a previous queen. How did that, because England.
Oh, but no, Victoria was quite separate. I mean, Victoria would hardly ever have been in the papers. She would have been revered. She was allowed to do what she liked. She became a recluse after her husband died.
Yeah.
And nobody castigated her for it.
No, but Queen Mary.
Well, Queen Mary was a queen consort.
Okay. But again, with these queen consorts, do you feel they have the same type of symbolic, do they have the same symbolic significance? So for example, we have Camilla and we have now Kate Middleton, who has a prominent role. What kind of monarch do you think?
Well, they are not going to be monarchs. They're going to be the spouses of monarchs.
Yes, but as the spouses of monarchs, do you think they will shape the monarchy to...
They will help, but they won't, because they're not in charge. They won't have the same impact that Elizabeth had.
Yeah, no, they won't. It's just even observing what kind of princess Kate is. What do you think of Kate as a princess?
I think she's doing a magnificent job.
Yeah. I think she's a good modern role model for young women.
Well, the big problem is, of course, that she gets to do all these things because of her position. She hasn't had to go out there and fight in the melee of business life.
She wasn't a person before.
So to that extent, if you like, she is pampered in her position. And so that accentuates the role of woman as wife.
What if she had been a career woman first? Would we see her differently?
Well, she'd have given it up. So, I mean, the Japanese, now I forget now whether he's their current emperor or whether he, but anyway, the young man fell in love with this really lovely girl he'd met. And he hoped that because of her background and the fact she'd done this, that, and heaven knows what, she would be able to help him to, if you like, open up the male domination within the Tokyo hierarchy. And from what I can see, all that's happened to this poor woman is that she has been penned up in a little cage, a metaphorical cage.
How does that happen?
And they've had one daughter, and of course, a daughter cannot inherit the crown, and so he's had to find a relation who comes down the right male lines to be his heir. I mean, obviously, you don't get anything out of the Japanese royal family, but looking at it from a distant observation, it looks as though it was suffocating.
Yeah.
But quite how it suffocated, I don't know.
Well, I know Japanese women who, we culturally, you get the impression that it is very much a male-dominated culture, and women are very docile and expected to be, um, subservient to men. I don't think that's very controversial to say. I've had people in Japan, have these types of have these types of conversations with me.
Mm.
But so do you feel then what can be done to change these dynamics so that women can feel more empowered to again come back into their full selves and transform? Are we just gonna keep having the odd symbolic woman and
I suspect that's what we're going to have.
and it's because of the male pushback, or is it because women are just not up for the challenge?
One of the things that concerns me about women, very able women, is the imposter syndrome that they seem to acquire.
Mm-hmm.
That they can't believe that it's really them that's been given this wonderful job, or that they actually have the real ability to do it. You've only got to watch women in interviews. I mean, women will tell you about all the things they can't do.
Right.
Men will come in and tell you how fabulous they are and how they're just the right sort of person for this job, and they actually haven't a clue. It's a completely different approach. Until we start to educate our women to be more confident, and I mean all of them, and not just the people who go to the expensive schools or the upper sections of our really good state schools, we're not going to get.
How
It's
did
not
you
going to work.
avoid that? How did you have any imposter syndrome?
No.
Wow. And is it because you earned your way there?
Yes.
Okay. Was it was it an inborn thing, would you say?
I didn't see why I was any worse than anybody else, simply because I didn't have a Y chromosome.
That's gotta be innate though. Having that kind of mentality, because you didn't get that from going to a private school or having a certain type of upbringing.
I got it from observation.
But who
I
was it that
watched.
you observed?
Well, I think, my childhood was traumatic, but it allowed me a lot of time to think.
Okay. And as you say, again, it was very symbolic. You had Queen Elizabeth there and you were reading a magazine. Can you tell us a little bit about the magazine?
I can't really remember, but I just remember this exciting magazine that turned up called the Young Elizabethan, which because we were now entering this fantastic new young exciting age called the Elizabethan age, with a beautiful young queen and a couple of lovely kids and a handsome husband, and it was what we needed. We were living in a very constrained society. It seems difficult to say now, but if you wanted to buy sweets, you had to produce coupons. If you wanted to buy food, you had to produce coupons. You were allowed so many eggs, depending on the number of your household each week.
Because of the rationing?
It was rationing, yes. And that slowly lifted in the 1950s. So that by the time we got to 1957, Macmillan was able to say proudly, "You've never had it so good."
And what were they referring to?
Well, he thought that we'd come a long way.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly he thought it was good. I'm not sure that the trades unions thought it was good, or that the vast All the vast numbers of people thought it was good, but clearly from his point of view, he was putting forward a view as to how marvelous his government was, and he told us so.
And you grew up with that optimism. Oh, sorry, you grew up internalizing that optimism.
We looked at it skeptically.
Okay.
Because we didn't see it.
And how did that then make you? Do you think actually that is what prepared you to the hardship that you had borne, prepared you to actually embody the fullness of the challenges that came at you during your career?
When I was little, I was the littlest in our group. I was the youngest, the baby. And I used to be made to do things to make sure it was safe for the others to do. So, for example, I'd be sent up a tree that nobody had tried climbing before, because if the branches broke, it meant it was too heavy for it, that they were too heavy for it. Oh. Nobody thought about the consequences of me falling off the tree. But equally, I could be disparaged. I could be put on the swing because everybody knew I loved swinging, and then they would pelt me with apples.
Wow, that is insane bullying already.
Yes.
And the littlest, there wasn't any compassion for. She's the little one.
Yeah, it was a joke. So I'd be sitting there screaming my little head off while somebody was pushing me to stop me from getting off the swing, and the others were busy using me as target practice.
I'm surprised that you're able to laugh it off. So when you're dealing with
life, it's called life, isn't it? You have to get on with it.
Yeah, it prepares you for misogyny in the chambers. But you said judging. What was the most sexist job that you had?
I don't think I've had one of those.
Wow. Do you think then men can sense a type of woman that they can? Do you think they can smell weakness in the kind of woman that they think they can?
I've not, I must admit, I've not thought about it that way. I mean, I've met a lot of extremely powerful, well, I suppose you could call them powerful women who've effectively done what they wanted. And I find them all really nice people to be with. Yeah, they're good company.
You find that, but we always get the sense that any strong woman is called, disparaging words, the B word.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I haven't been told that to my face.
Yeah. And did you hear it said of the other powerful women you worked with?
No. I did once. I'm just trying to think. I mean, I did have a partner in one of the firms I worked in who wasn't at all happy about having able women in the firm. Women were seen basically as being dog's bodies, people who did the secretarial work, answered the phone, did the messages and things like that. So he was unhappy to have women working on equal terms with him, but he had to learn to put up with it.
And did anybody ever challenge him and really try and psychoanalyze him?
I would laugh at him.
Really? And how did he react?
He didn't like it, but he put up with it.
Yeah. There's so much to learn from this. Honestly, I do feel like we have come really far, but in some ways we're taking so many steps back that it's really hard to understand where we end up.
We need to start training our boys to respect women, to love women, and to look after them. And we need to understand that they also need care and affection. And we all need to learn how to have free time and to do work for each other.
To look after each other.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't have.
Only teach that within the household as the children are growing up. And if you don't teach them that, they'll never learn it.
And if they don't have, I mean, we have a lot of broken families. Do you think that's a role that schools should be teaching, how to be in a happy marriage?
God knows. I don't know. I don't think the teachers know themselves.
No, no.
So that's
What we need is more people like you.
What we need is parents who, if the marriage breaks up, allow the children to believe that the other parent is a fantastic chap or chapess, that they just couldn't live together, and to be loving and respectful to each other, regardless of what the sex is.
Yeah. Keep your own problems in your domain and then let the children have good relations with each of you.
You have to. It's not fair.
No. Women personally.
We need to nurture our children, because if we don't, we just perpetuate the problems.
Yeah. Erica, it was such a pleasure to talk to you. I could go on forever. And yeah, I hope we can meet up soon.
Okay. See you for coffee shortly. Take care then.
Thank you, Erica. Speak soon. Bye.
Bye. Bye.